In today's episode, we talk with the amazing Sue Izzo about some very deep mental health issues. We want all our listeners to know out there that help is available. Speak with someone today. Call the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 800-273-8255. Thank you for listening and enjoy our episode. Our guest today is a true entrepreneur, the founder of Mosaic Sports Management Agency, which at the time she was the only female to own a sports management agency at that time. A captivating speaker and storyteller, a cancer survivor, a business consultant and coach, the amazing Sue Izzo.
Oh, thank you for that introduction. Wow.
Thank you so much for being here. And as a reminder, to watch the video version of our podcast and see Sue's lovely smiling face, please visit neverloseyourcape.com. Sue, thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to chat with you today.
I'm excited too. And let's get right into our warm-up segment. So you get 2 questions from me, 1 from Serafina. First, what are you binge watching right now?
I am binge watching Pretend It's a City with Fran Lebowitz right now. And I'm definitely loving it because I'm an East Coaster and I'm sure missing New York.
Oh, interesting. I have not seen that and I have to put it on my list now.
Very good. Yeah, I'm digging it.
And second question, best thing about quarantine 2020?
No traffic in California. It is like 6 lanes of bumper to bumper. And I feel like it's the apocalypse. There's no one on the highway and I'm loving it.
That could not be more true. And you are the first person to say that. I'm so glad you brought that up. That's the main reason why I feel like I could never live in California.
Yeah, it is a reason not to live in California. I'll tell you that.
No, traffic is pretty bad. But no, Sue, thank you so much for being here. My question is, do you have a favorite athlete that you worked with?
Oh gosh, they're going to get so mad at me if I pick just one. Oh goodness. Okay, this is why I'm going to say this person. Sofia Milanovic, who was my surfer from Peru. The reason why I'm saying Sophia, and I loved all my athletes equally, I sound like a mother. The reason why is because Sophia was like the Michael Jordan meets Evita of Peru, and we didn't see it coming. And watching her manage that with grace and grow up, because she was very young when it all happened, it was an incredible journey to be on with her. And so to watch someone really change a country and inspire legions of people was amazing. So that's why I'm going to say her.
Awesome. Thank you.
Nice. And that's actually a great segue. We're going to go right into it. So did you always know you wanted to work in sports?
No. My mother told me to go to college and become a school teacher because when I got married and had kids, I'd have the summers off. And so I was too busy following the Grateful Dead when she was giving me that advice that I thought, well, that'll be easy, major. No. So I did not know that I wanted to work in sports. I always was active in sports, playing soccer, tennis was my big sport. But it wasn't until I went to undergrad in Vermont and met a boy who was a snowboarder and started working at Burton Snowboards that I was introduced to marketing and sales and professional athletes. And that's where, my passion was kind of cultivated and ignited to wanting to work with professional athletes.
I love it. And I love the Burton shout out. Amazing luggage. Thank you, Burton.
Yes.
And then what's crazy is that you didn't really have it in your plan. Then you started doing it. And then you were like, hey, you know what? I'm just going to start my own business. I'm just going to be the first female to own a sports agency. Really?
Yeah, really. I, honestly, I had done this youth market research job for a company where I drove an RV around the country for 8 months, talking to kids ages 10 to 24 about trends. The companies that put us on the road to do the youth market research was Quicksilver, BMG, Music, Jones Soda, Vans, and we'd have to go back to Wall Street and tell them what the kids were into. In that company, there was a sports agent, an attorney who actually represented an athlete. When my marketing job was over, he asked me to work underneath him. And so I did that for about 6 months. And he had said, you're good at this. He knew my background from working at Burton. And he said, you should be a sports agent. And so there were 2 attorneys in the office and they're like, we'll help you. start your company. So I was 25 years old and started. And the beauty of it was it afforded me to be able to use so many things I was interested in. I love sales, I love marketing, I love athletes, I love PR. So it was kind of the perfect opportunity, but I had zero idea what I was doing and really no training in it.
And what's crazy, just from being in the sports and entertainment world myself for 15 years, like it's not easy to start from the ground up and acquire athletes. And so, like, how did you, by the way, I love the name of your agency. How did you come up with that name? And then how did you like slowly acquire athletes?
Yeah, so Mosaic is exactly that. Before I got the marketing job, the youth market research job, I couldn't find a job. And this allowed me, I was kind of like, I always loved mosaics. And it was like, well, I get to take all my different talents, like I just said, the sales, the marketing, the PR, and put it all together and make a pretty picture. So that's where Mosaic came from. And then how I got athletes was, I had met a lot of athletes when I was working at Burton, and so I knew some snowboarders, and so I remember calling one snowboarder. He didn't pick up the phone. I called the second snowboarder. His name is Keir Dillon, and I said, "Listen, I'm going to be a sports agent. I want to know if I could try to get you deals." And this was very early on in action sports for agents, and so he was like,
"Yeah." What year is this?
This was in 1999. So really,
pre-social media.
Oh yeah, pre-LinkedIn, pre all of that. So then he said, sure, I'll give you a chance. And the first deal I got him was like one of the early beverage deals, and it was with Sobe Beverages. And it was, so that's how it started. And then once I started getting some traction for Keir, then I was able to sign a second snowboarder. And then a couple of years later, I signed my first surfer, and I knew nothing about surfing, and got into that.
I wish you could all, if you're listening to this, go to our website and check out the video, because I'm over here currently buried in 20 inches of snow, and Sue has the most amazingly relaxing backdrop. She has a surfboard behind her. So I highly recommend you check out her ambiance that she has going on. But so at this point, when you're acquiring athletes, what city and state are you in?
I was in Westport, Connecticut, where I was born and raised. My family was. I was in my 5th grade bedroom at the time. I had my little Gateway computer, my little Gateway laptop, and the Rolodex that I had started building when I worked at Burton Snowboards. So that was how it all started. And, I knew at the time that in order to get deals, like, again, there wasn't LinkedIn, so I couldn't find email addresses of marketing directors so easily or contact people. So I knew in press releases, there were the email address, right? So they would tell you kind of the format of it. So then I would Google marketing director. I would find the marketing director's name. I would take the email address, from the press release, and then I would email the marketing directors and be like, my name's Sue Izzo with the global sports management agency, Mosaic, and we represent world-renowned snowboarders. And I just started BSing my way and pitching.
Amazing. I mean, fake it till you make it. Everybody has to start somewhere.
Oh, totally.
And I think that your drive to get going was absolutely amazing. And so now you're 25. Mm-hmm. It's a couple years in, and you're really doing well. And now the Olympics are coming up, and you've acquired 11 athletes in a short amount of time?
Well, actually, you got to fast forward that. So the first Olympics I went through actually was, I guess it was 2002, maybe? I'm not even sure. Yeah. So 2002, and both my athletes that I had I didn't have a big roster at 2002, maybe like 3 athletes, 4 athletes. It wasn't until 2009, 2010 Olympics, and then 2014 Olympics. That's when things were really hopping for the company. So it was
so what was your turning point of when you were like, okay, this is a lot. I can actually grow now. I can start hiring people.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So I remember my first hire was in probably 2004, 2005 was my first hire, and I put it on like Craigslist, I think, like looking for an assistant. Yeah, I did. And Tracy Costello was her name. And she was a mom. She had like an 11-year-old daughter. And she came to my house, and I had this little office, and she helped me with administrative work. And that was like step one. And then, it started taking off around, because that's when the roster was really growing, 2004, 2005. And so then I got my first office space here in Encinitas, California. And then it was, hiring the accountant and then another assistant. And, it just started really growing from that point.
So that's a big move. So you moved from, by the way, hilarious that this woman from Connecticut is representing a surfer. Just want to throw that out there.
Yeah.
So you decide, okay, so now this is big. I'm going to move my whole life to California. And really like, now I'm curious, did that assistant go with you?
Well, I actually moved to California in end of 2002, beginning of 2003. So I didn't hire anybody until I was in California. So yeah, that was kind of the trajectory of it. The industry was out here. Action sports industry was really in Southern California. So I felt that I needed to be here for that. So that was the reason for the move. And so I feel like I've been here forever, which I think I have, like over 17 years.
So now take me to the absolute height of your agency. You are excelling beyond your wildest dreams. I mean, this was a dream you didn't know you wanted, and then it is happening and you're in it.
Yeah, it was unbelievable, actually. I mean, what happened was it was around the time, around 2005, 2006. So my roster, I was signing like the best athletes. I had the most incredible roster of professional snowboarders. And then my roster of surfers was really coming up as well. And I want to say it was like it was some luck and hard work. And at the time, my snowboarders were all like killing it and like winning everything. And they were just the ones to watch. And then Sophia, who I mentioned earlier, she went from virtually just getting on the pro tour to winning the world title. And that's like winning the Stanley Cup. And it happened relatively quickly within a 2-year period. And from that point, like her business alone was so massive. I started splitting my time between the States and Peru because there was so much business there for her. So it became, oh my gosh, I need to get another agent at this time. So I brought in an agent to help me manage the surfing division so I could grow that further. And so it was incredible. I mean, it really was incredible. I was a player, at that time. And I was like, it was amazing because I was on my own. I was a female. I owned the agency. Everybody else had, dollars behind them that had agencies, and I had never took any money, never had any investment. It was just all done on my own. So yeah.
And what I want our listeners to know out there, that there are, in the sports and entertainment world, there are all different types of agents. There are agents that just do contracts. There are agents that get you broadcasting deals, and there are agents that get you just sponsorship deals. The type of agent that Sue is an all-encompassing agent. So contracts, sponsorships, commercials, any interview on the local television station. Like, you are one person doing all of this. I want our listeners to know the magnitude of how difficult and ridiculous that is. I mean, that's ridiculous to do it for 1, 2, 3 athletes, but to do it for the number that you were doing, like, that's insane.
Yeah, it was, I was feeding my soul, so to say, because I have such a creative brain that I needed to do entertainment deals and event deals and licensing deals. I couldn't help myself in a way. Like, I didn't even know what building an athlete brand was. I was just doing it because I was just following my gut. And I also knew that, in with athletes, you're in the business of humans, and that's a very tricky business to be in. And so they could be winning one day and be on top of it and getting all the endorsement deals. And then the next day they could be injured. And then there's injury clauses. And that means, compensation could be reduced. So I needed to think, and I went through some crazy, crazy injuries and even an athlete dying. So it really woke me up to, how do I keep them valuable if they're off, at a competition? And so that's where it was like, well, how do I build an entertainment property around them? How do I build an event property around them? How do we build businesses, for them to have other revenue streams outside of endorsement deals? So that's how I started, like, really looking at athletes and choosing athletes, where it was like, can I build these three pillars around them? It wasn't just about winning, the most winningest athlete. They had to have other areas that I could build off of to keep them, attractive and adding value.
And another important anecdote is that you're representing snowboarders and surfers for the most part.
Yes.
Those are young athletes. It's one thing to represent athletes 35 to 55.
Right.
It's not like you're in the golf circuit.
Right.
It is a very big and challenging deal to represent a young adult.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I mean, these are kids that are, some of my athletes that I signed were like 12, right? The average age was like 16, 17. And so you sign these kids and, they go from, competing on a certain level, and then all of a sudden they get an endorsement deal that's worth millions of dollars, and they're 17. So it is, a massive responsibility. So I would, obviously my relationship with the athlete was also as important with the parents and the families. And so, it was a community effort. And, I would always say to the athletes, like, when they got their first big deal, it was like, all right, let's get the toy out of the way. That was first and foremost. Buy your truck, buy whatever you want to buy, like, let's get it out of your way. And then from that point, I, kind of had a buffet service where I'd say, here are 3 wealth managers and financial planners I want you to talk to. You could pick one or you could pick none, but we need to start setting up your plan. So, it was really important to me, because I've seen the best and the worst of, professional athletes, and, them losing their money, and their parents blowing their money. So I really took it very serious to make sure that that was set in place first and foremost. The other thing that I think why people signed with me, was because I really and truly believed you needed to be the best person in order to be the best professional. So cultivation of the person was so important to me. And I was always like, these were my kids. So it was really important to share life lessons with them and teach them as much as I could. When they're 17, they're like, oh, don't tell me not to do drugs, and you're like, no, listen. So I laugh with them now because they're all in their 30s. And I actually just received a text the other day thanking me, for what I did for an athlete when they were like 17, and the life lessons that they've carried with them. So that was really important to me.
I mean, this is a huge responsibility. Not only are you trying to make them succeed as an athlete, you're trying to make their brand succeed. You're trying to develop them into good human beings. You're trying to get them to be fiscally responsible. That's a lot of pressure. That's a lot of pressure.
Yeah. And then you had the parents, on top of it. So, or the spouses and the girlfriends. And so, it's not just a one and done. And I think, it was a blessing and a curse the way that I approached it. I couldn't have done it any other way. That's just who I am. But I was so invested, where, I probably should have had some stronger boundaries. I learned that lesson later on. But I just took it very serious. I mean, these were very young kids. And the thing about these sports too, is that there's not a union. And so they're not really protected. If they have a life-ending injury or career-ending injury, there's no union for them. They're independent contractors. So they get hurt or they die, then the contracts are null and void. Nobody's getting paid out or getting any sort of, insurance policy. Well, so not really, but so it's, it was very, I took it very serious.
So now all that I'm thinking in my head is that, like, how are you surviving? Because all I'm hearing is go, 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 work my ass off
Mhm.
and go from one flight to the next, from one athlete to the next. Like, how are you functioning at this time?
I was not functioning at all. I've lived with depression since I was a young child. And this was something that, I always had to be aware of and managing and dealing with. And so for me, I didn't even honestly, like, I just didn't even consider myself like in all of this. It was just all about them and their successes and helping them achieve their dreams. So any of my self-care, self-love, self-worth, all of it was at the bottom, the bottom. I don't even think I acknowledged it even existed. So it became very apparent, and it became this burnout, and then these heavy, just pressing the depression down, like being like, oh, I'll deal with it later, or just give me another drug to just manage, like, the depression while I could get through the Olympics or get through this, right? None of it was managed. It was just suppressed. And that came to a very jarring boiling point and halt in 2009, 2010.
And you just hit rock bottom?
I did, yeah. So, like I said, this has been a lifelong journey with depression. And so in 2009, that summer, my depression was really not, it was really getting the better of me. And I was in therapy and I was doing everything, but the sadness and the pain was just kept bubbling up. And I could,
And this is at the height of your success.
yes. So I'm going into the 2010 Olympics. I have 5 athletes that are slated to make the US team. 2 of them are slated to beat, the dominant snowboarder, Shaun White. It was Kevin Pierce and Danny Davis were 2 of my athletes. And they were on an incredible winning streak and just really at the top of it, and just like the most exciting athletes to watch. And that summer, they were down in New Zealand training, and then we go into the season, which is in December. And I remember being at an event with Kevin, and I just remember it was one of the qualifiers, and I just remember, he had a concussion, and I remember being like, okay, I wasn't doing well mentally at all, and my depression was pretty bad. And I remember leaving the event and just saying, like, I'm going to go home. And I actually flew to Connecticut to be with my family versus going back to California, because I just needed to be around my family. And after the holidays, I went back home to California. Kevin was training for the last Olympic qualifier, and he had suffered a tragic injury. He suffered a traumatic brain injury, and it was I got this phone call on New Year's Eve saying, Kevin's injured, he's in the hospital, you got to get to Utah. And I didn't really know. We didn't really know. Kevin hit his head, and I got to the hospital, and it was the worst thing I've ever seen. We didn't know if Kevin was going to live. And so there I was. And again, I was way too close to my clients at this time. I mean, it was like mama bear times a million, like just absurd, too close. And I was just shook, just totally shook, as you can imagine. And, it was a really devastating time, because again, we didn't know if he was going to live. And we got his family there, and I was like reeling from that, and ended up back in California. And my family, my mother and my sister flew out, because again, I wasn't doing well with my depression at this time. And so this obviously made things a lot worse. And then not even 17 days later, Danny Davis, Kevin's best friend, my other athlete, won a contest. He made a poor choice that night and ended up driving an ATV into a gate, and the ATV flipped over onto him, and he broke his back and his pelvis. So I got the phone call that morning saying, Danny's in the hospital. We don't know, what happened. So then I was back on another plane back to Utah. They're in different hospitals. And we didn't know if Danny was going to walk, the injury was pretty severe. So within the span of 17 days, my two athletes that I love beyond anything, and all of a sudden they're in two separate hospitals. Obviously, neither one's going to the Olympics at this point. So the kids I love the most, I don't, are facing serious injuries. And then my whole business that I built for 10 years, kind of all of a sudden somewhat came crashing down a little bit, at least in my perception. And then I was already dealing with crazy depression at this time. So it was, when I say the perfect storm, it was the perfect storm. So that spring after, I ended up going to the Olympics for another client in Vancouver. Right after the event, the following morning, I walked outside my hotel room and just bawled my eyes out and just kind of broke. And that a couple months later, I ended up, I got some bad news from a client. And I just remember turning to my employees and saying, hey, listen, I'll be back. And I walked out of my office and I drove to my house and I walked into my bathroom and I took every single pill in the medicine cabinet. I laid out all the notes and instructions for people because obviously, I'd been thinking about this for a while, and and I just I was tired. I was done, and I realized I just did not want to live anymore.
I mean, again, all I hear is that you're getting this devastating, these athletes are like your children, and one is in a coma in the hospital. The other one has suffered a, could be never walk again injury. And then you're off to Vancouver. Again, it's just you going from place to place to place and not processing or not feeling anything. And what do you think, when you look back at this, this was a scary time. What do you remember is your darkest point?
Well, here's the thing. It wasn't just the Kevin and Danny injury that led to that moment. This was a lifetime of, being a child of an adult alcoholic, having my own demons and, other things. So this was a culmination of a lifetime. It wasn't, those were just kind of, I think, the icing on the cake, the events of I'm so tired, right? It wasn't just isolated in that. And I think the dark time was, to be honest, was waking up in a psych ward. And because what happened was that night there, that afternoon that I attempted suicide, a 5150 was called on me because, meaning that's if you're going to be a harm to yourself or a harm to others, because one of my athletes broke into my house when my doctor called and said, you got to get to her. I think something's happened that day. And when the ambulance came and the firemen were in my house that I vaguely remember, I refused to go with them. And so they had to call a 5150 on me. So the next thing I remember was I'm in an ambulance, or I'm in an emergency room. And I remember seeing my athlete here sitting there. And I remember also seeing the bag of pills, they took all the pills. And I remember seeing that. And I remember trying to get to the pills in the hospital, them putting me back down and being holy shit, this chick is for real. And so then from there, but because my parents were, I had no family in California. So the next thing you know, I'm in another ambulance, and I wake up in this psych ward in San Diego. And just this, just a crazy story of this woman. And this is just, it's almost out of a movie, honest to God. And it's I'm in this bed and I see this, open my eyes, and there's this old lady with stringy gray hair and a gown just standing over me going, don't wake up or I'm going to kill you. And I was so still drugged up. And I'm how is this my life right now? How is this my life? And I had to stay in that psych ward for 72 hours because only a family member could get me out. And so my parents had to fly across the United States to get me out of there. And then when I finally got out, with my medical team, it was, okay, what do we do here? And this is where the big blessing came out of all of it. And a huge blessing, a gift was, I ended up doing a 6-week outpatient program. Um, and it was the first time, and I was 35, it was the first time in 35 years I had ever been in a room with anyone else that suffered from depression and talked about it. I had been alone in that for 35 years because back then nobody talked about it. Nobody. There weren't commercials and ads and hotlines. Like, it was, if you suffered from depression, you were weak, you didn't talk about it. It was shame, right? So here I was, finally not alone. And it was the biggest gift ever for me. And it changed, that was the beginning of kind of really digging deep, dealing with traumas, understanding my brain and understanding depression, and learning tools to help me, manage it. And yeah, it was amazing. I mean, it was step one of amazing.
Thank you. I know that is you being really raw and vulnerable. So I thank you so much for sharing that with me and with our listeners. And let's go right into that, because I think this is what it's all about. Is so, like, tell us what works for you. What's in your toolkit that when you feel low, like, what helps you persevere through that?
Sure. Yeah. I think first and foremost for me was really taking a look at the thought that I was having, right? So I make a sweeping generalization, and I still deal with this, where it's like, I'm a failure, right? I'm a failure. Now, I stacked so many accolades and accomplishments, but in my mind, I was still a failure because I didn't get that MTV deal, or my athlete didn't get the gold medal, right? So nothing else mattered. Nothing else that I accomplished mattered because those things didn't happen. So I was a failure. And so I really believed that thought. And then it's like, wait a minute. So is that the truth? Right? I really had to ask like that question of every single thought. Is it the truth? And so, well, no, like, yes, I quote unquote failed, or that didn't happen for me, but am I a total failure? No, because I've accomplished X, Y, Z, right? So that was like step one in looking at emotions and looking at thoughts and determining if they were true, right? Because we tend to think of them as like the almighty truth, and that sets us down a rabbit's hole. So that was a big tool. The other thing too, I had to learn boundaries, right? And most importantly, I really had to learn self-love. There was old code in my brain from, childhood trauma that just, I believed, that I wasn't worthy. And so I really carried that with me. And so it was really learning to like myself and then ultimately love myself. And that was really hard. That was really hard.
So examining your thoughts and determining if what you're thinking is actually true, that's really, really important, because sometimes we talk ourselves into or out of what we think, but that doesn't mean that it's actually true. So I love that you said examine your thoughts to actually determine if they're true. Practicing some boundaries, which I myself personally struggle with.
Yes.
And self-love, like learning to really, think of who you are, and having self-worth within yourself, and not seeking that from others. Like you said, if an athlete didn't win a gold medal, it was a failure for you. That's a really easy thing to get sucked into and a really tough thing to get out of.
Absolutely. And I think like we get so far away from ourselves, right? Because as we become adults, we have our business and our career, we have our partners, we have our children, right? So there's all these other things that are, this is who I am. And this person that we once were, like, kind of gets pushed to the wayside. And I think I didn't know what happiness was anymore. I had no clue what made me happy. Like that, when they asked me that question, I looked at them and all I could answer was with business things. And so then it was like, okay, so what does the happiness look like? And I remember, tennis, played tennis my whole life. And I was like, I remember tennis made me happy. Now, I don't need tennis lessons, but I knew that I needed to go back to something that brought joy. So I signed up for tennis lessons. And it was like step one in like starting to feel happiness again and joy again. And so that became like church for me, was going and taking a lesson. So I had to slowly introduce things like that into my life to figure out, you know, who Sue was again and what happiness was for me, and to feel it, right? Because I'd been without it, or at least it was always conditional with my business happiness. So it was interesting to go on that journey personally.
I love that so much. I read this story about this 70-year-old woman that got up at 5 a.m. and went ice skating 5 mornings a week because it brought her true joy.
Yeah.
So I love that, you know, looking inside yourself and finding the thing that brought you true joy, even if it was something from when you were a kid, and going back to it and
Yeah.
just practicing that for yourself to bring yourself back to full joy. Now, during this time, your business is still running.
It is. Yeah. Oh, it is. Yeah. So, you know, at the time, you know, I had another agent and I had a full staff, and they were kind of covering for me. And I think the athletes were like, where the hell is she? You know? But yeah, so, you know, we made it through that, or I made it through that, and the business was continuing to grow and thrive. And I bounced back. You know, it was difficult. Kevin ended up leaving our agency and going with a bigger agency. And Danny, he's unbelievable. He came back from that injury, not only to, you know, walk, he had to relearn to walk. He ended up making the 2014 Olympic team to go to Russia. So he is one of the, Danny and Kevin are two of the most incredible people I know for certain. You know, they've both recovered. I'm so proud of them as human beings, and what they've been through personally, and their character. So yeah, so Danny ended up going, I ended up going with Danny to Russia for those Olympic Games. But then I had another bit of a hiccup with my depression. Not a hiccup, I, you know, kind of fell apart again from things. So the business was even bigger at this time, and there was more on the line in terms of responsibility, and we really expanded. And you know, again, I was dealing with, you know, depression, and ended up checking myself into this time a full treatment center for a month. And it was quite classic, where I was just like, I gotta go deal with all this. And there I was sitting in Nunnally, Tennessee at the Recovery Ranch. And I remember, like, in total Sue Izzo fashion, like running things, like I'm kind of like giving everybody therapy in the trauma house, right? Like,
You're like, I'm a veteran, I got this. Let me run the day.
yeah. And they're all looking at me, and they're like, do you work here? I'm like, no, I just paid 20 grand to come too. Like, and they're like, why are you here? I'm like, oh, I'm a mess. They're like, no, you're not. And then all of a sudden, you know, we get in a group and they give me like one exercise to do, and I fell apart. But, you know, I really think, like, you know, in Europe, they give people like months off for the summer. I really think everybody should be required to go into a treatment facility for 30 days to work on themselves, or like have a 30-day window to work on themselves every year, because it definitely wasn't a laughing matter. It was very hard. But it was, again, just dealing with old code and old trauma. And I'm so grateful for it, because it was a pivotal point in my life. And after that, you know, I have been absolutely amazing, and I'm very lucky. I feel very lucky.
I mean, what you said too is that this isn't a sprint, it's a marathon. Things
Sure
like
yeah.
depression and anxiety and addiction, all of those are not, there's no quick fix. You have to work on it every single day. And that might mean going and doing 30 days to yourself every year. I actually love that idea. I think of how more beneficial each of us would probably be in our everyday lives. Like, I watched this special where Bill Gates, he takes think weeks where
Yeah.
he just goes away for a week and just reads and thinks and works on himself. And I just think of how much better if we allowed ourselves to do that. But
Well, yeah, I mean,
now,
yeah.
your
Sorry.
story isn't even over.
No.
So keep
No.
going. What happens?
So I leave Nunnally, Tennessee. I turned 40. I was 39. I turned 40. And I remember that morning, because I never thought I'd make 40, with my depression. And I remember that morning, August 20th was my birthday. And I remember waking up and it was like thundering, like East Coast thunder in Southern California, which it doesn't happen. And I was like, okay, those are my higher powers telling me that I've made it. Right. And I like woke up with the biggest smile on my face, like, holy shit, I did it. Like, I'm here. Right. So that year, I was like, okay, a lot was put into perspective over this time. I definitely was getting burnt out on my business. And so I decided it was time to sell and merge. And so I had an opportunity with Octagon, which is a massive agency, global agency.
Massive.
And yeah. And so my good friend, Peter Carlisle, he represents Michael Phelps, and we came to an agreement and they acquired my company. And I had decided just to keep a couple clients and they took the rest. And so I was excited. I'm like, okay, I'm ready for a change and to really, really slow down. Like, that was my big thing. I'm going to slow down. But in typical fashion, I didn't. I was still operating at a really high pace. And then about 5 months after the sale, I was laying in bed and just happened to have my arm back. And I don't know why I was doing it, but I felt under my right armpit. And I'm like, that's weird. Like, what's that lump? And I had a doctor's appointment and I pointed it out to the doctor, and the doctor was like, oh, well, it kind of moves around. That doesn't seem like it's, breast cancer. He's like, but come back in 6 months and we'll check it out. And went back in 6 months. I'd gotten the mammogram. It came back suspicious. And he was like, oh, well, you're young, no history of cancer. And I'm like, well, let's just get a biopsy. So ordered the biopsy. I was on the biopsy table. The doctor's like, I've done this a million times. I could tell you right now, this isn't cancer. Okay. Waiting for the results, waiting, and finally get the results. And it was stage 2 breast cancer. So I was 41 years old. And I just sat there and I was like, I got the news and I was like, I was scared shitless, but I almost laughed. Like, I spent 39 years trying to kill myself and thinking that I didn't want to live. And now I have to fight for my life. And but I was ready. Like, that was kind of the cool part. But it was a moment. It was definitely a moment. And so then my cancer journey began.
2 things that I want to pull from that is, one, like, shame on that doctor for saying I've done this a million times and it's not this. I don't know why you would ever say that as a doctor.
Yeah.
And 2, like, bravo to you for saying, like, no, let's get a biopsy, because nobody knows your body better than yourself. I recently, in December of 2020, had a bunch of tumors removed from my ankle, and I had gone because I knew that I could physically see a lump, but I knew that I knew it was bad in my bones. I had been in pain for 2 years, and I had actually rested for a significant period of time, and it had seemed to get worse. So it's like, we know ourselves the best. And so I really commend you for saying, like, no, let's make this, let's get at this.
Yeah. I had been getting mammograms since I was about 37 out of being paranoid. Right. And it never showed up. So, and where the lump was really weird, because if anyone's ever, obviously women understand getting mammograms, it's really like you have to be a contortionist. But this tumor was almost in my armpit, where they don't really put your arm in there. So, again, I just feel like for whatever reason, somebody was steering me to go feel that part of my body that night. And yes, you're absolutely right. My own doctor, the surgeon, everybody just kept pushing me off because they said I was too young and there was no history of cancer in my family. You have to know your body inside and out. You have to push. You have to be your own advocate. Just like what I explain to people, it's like, as a sports agent, I could close my eyes and I could tell you exactly how to build your career. It's very rote. It's in my mind. I know how to do it. Doctors are somewhat going through the same thing, where it's like the same thing every day, right? So be your own health advocate, 100%.
And then you get this diagnosis, you fight like hell.
Yeah.
And you're the freaking superstar that you are today. Talk a little bit about what you're doing now, and then I have an important question I want you to reflect back on.
Sure. So after going through 4 months of chemo, a lumpectomy, 33 rounds of radiation, and a little bit more chemo, came out of that, finished up 1 year of being an agent, and then my athlete and I parted ways, and I stepped away from sports management and closed my company. And then I have pivoted, and what I love doing, which is building businesses and building brands, because I love doing that for the athletes. So now I do that for business owners and entrepreneurs. And so I guess I'm dubbed kind of a business growth coach. So I help people build their businesses, identifying marketing and branding opportunities, along with helping them develop processes. And then really the coaching part, which I love the most, which is helping people become a resilient entrepreneur. I'm most recently launching, I'm very excited about this, to finally step back into sports. I'm launching a sports management mastermind for aspiring collegiate action sports and Olympic athletes and their parents, to help educate them on how to build your brand as an athlete, develop relationships with sponsors and agents and coaches, and everything in between. So that's actually launching in a couple weeks. And yeah.
Gosh, that's amazing. That education piece is so important. And I love how you said for the athletes and their parents, because that's such a huge part of it. I mean, we talk about this all the time, that us being in the real world is like, gosh, this should really be, there are certain things that should be required classes in high school and college, so that we're developing people to be more confident adults, that they can stand on their own 2 feet with things that are scary, like legal things and finance things and all that sort of stuff. So clearly you're an amazing person, and I love you, and I'm so grateful that you're sharing your story with us. But I want you to, right now, if you could go back and tell Sue when you were at your lowest, like, what would you tell her?
So simple. You're perfect the way you are. You're doing a great job.
I think we all need to hear that.
Yeah.
You are enough. You're doing great. You're enough.
More than enough. Like, you're amazing. Like, you're awesome. You're like, are you kidding? Like, look at us. Like, here's the thing. Every single day, we have this gift that we get to open our eyes, put our feet on the ground, and stand up and have free will to make choices and create things. Like, what? That is insane. So it's truly up to us on what we do with each day. Yes, life is going to throw crazy ass curveballs, no doubt. And there's going to be great days, and there's going to be really, really, really shitty ones. But you know what? We still get that same opportunity each and every day to get up and make a choice and try to do better again. That's it. And you got to have grace, give yourself grace. You got to forgive yourself. You got to let go of those unrelenting expectations, because they're just plain stupid, and just find joy in every opportunity that you possibly can, and laugh and smile as much as possible.
I love that. When I go back and listen to this, I'm going to re-listen to what you just said like 5 times. I want everyone to let that sink in. And then this is my last question for you. What is your message of hope that you want other people to know?
It's my mantra, and that is, I love you. Keep going.
Oh, So good. If you're listening out there, we love you and keep going. Sue, thank you so much for being vulnerable with us and for sharing your story of perseverance with all of us. I am so grateful for you. And if you have any further questions or comments for myself or for Sue, please visit our website, neverloseyourcape.com, and send us a note in the contact us section. And as a reminder, to see the video version of this episode, you can visit neverloseyourcape.com. Sue, God bless you. Thank you so much for sharing. We love you and we're so inspired by you.
Oh, thank you guys so much.